Have you ever watched someone you love slowly fade from a room full of people? I have. It's like watching a ghost in reverse. The person is still there, but they become less and less visible with each cruel word, each pointed exclusion, each time their name gets left off the family holiday cards. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and I'm 38 years old. I've been married to my husband David for 14 years, and we have the most incredible 7-year-old son named Luke. But Luke didn't come to us the way most children come to their parents. We adopted him when he was 18 months old, after years of trying and hoping and praying for a family of our own. The first time I held Luke in my arms, I knew he was meant to be ours. He had these bright green eyes that seemed to look right, through to your soul, and the most infectious laugh I'd ever heard. When he wrapped his tiny fingers around mine, I felt something click into place, like a puzzle piece I didn't even know was missing. For the first 5 years of Luke's life, everything was perfect. My parents adored him. My mother would spend hours reading him stories, teaching him to bake cookies, letting him help in her famous vegetable garden. My father would take him fishing, teach him baseball, buy him his first bicycle. To them, Luke was their grandson, period. No qualifiers, no asterisks. But that changed when my sister Rachel had her biological children. Rachel got married 3 years after us, to a man named Brian from what she liked to call one of the founding families of our small town in Georgia. They had twin daughters, Emma and Ella, and from the moment those babies were born, everything shifted. Subtly at first, then with growing clarity as the months passed. At first, it was small things. Birthday cards for the twins would arrive, weeks before their actual birthdays, while Luke's would show up a day late, if at all. Family photos on my parents' mantle started featuring the twins prominently, while Luke appeared in background shots, often partially cropped out. My mother's famous Christmas cookies, the ones she'd taught Luke to help make, suddenly became too complicated for little hands, though she had no problem letting 4-year-old Emma and Ella help decorate them. David noticed it before I did. He's perceptive that way, always watching, always protecting our little family. "Sarah," he'd say gently, "did you notice how your mom spent the whole dinner talking about the twins' dance recital, but didn't ask Luke about his art show?" I'd make excuses. Mom was tired. She had so much on her mind. The twins were younger. They needed more attention. But deep down, a cold dread was forming in my stomach, like swallowing ice water on a January morning. The turning point came last, Thanksgiving. We were all gathered at my parents' house, a sprawling colonial they'd owned for 30 years, the place where Rachel and I had grown up, where we'd imagined our own children would play and grow. The dining table was set with Mom's best china, the one with tiny blue flowers that had belonged to her mother before her. Luke was excited because he'd spent weeks making a special place card for everyone in the family. He'd drawn pictures, clumsy but heartfelt depictions of each person. For my mom, he'd drawn her in her garden with tomatoes and carrots. For my dad, a fishing pole with a big fish on the line. For Rachel, he'd drawn her with her piano because she used to play for him when he was little. As we gathered around the table, Luke proudly showed everyone his creations. My heart swelled watching his face light up with pride. But then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. My mother was rearranging the place cards. "Luke, sweetie," she said in that tone adults use when they're about to disappoint a child. "These are lovely, but I already made grown-up place cards. Why don't we put yours on the craft table in the playroom instead?" Luke's face fell, but before I could protest, he asked the question that ripped my heart in two. "Is it because I don't belong here, Grandma Jean?" The room went silent. My mother's spoon clattered against her plate. Rachel suddenly became very interested in adjusting Emma's napkin. But instead of reassuring Luke, my mother did something I'll never forget. She patted Luke's head like you'd pat a friendly dog, and said, "Of course you're welcome here, sweetheart. You're special in your own way. The twins are family, so it's a little different. You understand, don't you?" I stared at her, unable to process what I'd just heard. This woman who had cried tears of joy when we brought Luke home, who had declared she finally felt complete as a grandmother, was now drawing a line between him and his cousins, my sister's real family. David stood up immediately, helping Luke with his coat. "We should go," he said quietly, his voice tight with controlled anger. But I couldn't move. I sat there frozen, watching my son's small shoulders shake as he tried not to cry, watching my mother avoid my gaze, watching my sister deliberately look away. Rachel tried to smooth things over. "Mom didn't mean it that way, Sarah. You know how she gets confused sometimes. She just worries about keeping things fair and..." Fair? The word exploded out of me. How is any of this fair to Luke? He's 7 years old, and you're all treating him like he's a second-class citizen in his own family. "Don't be dramatic," my mother replied, her voice sharp. "I love Luke. I've always loved him. But you have to admit, Sarah, it's different. Rachel's children share our blood, our heritage. They'll inherit the family farm, the antiques, the traditions. Luke has his own heritage to discover." The words hung in the air like poison gas. I finally understood what had been happening all along. In their minds, Luke wasn't really family. He was a guest, a temporary addition to our family tree, someone who would eventually find his real roots elsewhere. That night, after Luke had cried himself to sleep, David and I sat at our kitchen table, both of us shaken by what had transpired. "We can't keep exposing him to this," David said, rubbing his face wearily. "He's starting to believe them, starting to think he doesn't belong." But where else would he belong? These were the only grandparents Luke had ever known. We had cut ties with David's family years ago due to their refusal to accept his career choices, and his parents had passed away before we met. My parents were supposed to be Luke's safe place, his anchors, his legacy. The weeks after Thanksgiving were strange and hollow. I called my mother several times, each conversation feeling forced and artificial. She'd ask about Luke, but only in passing, like asking about the weather, polite but without real interest. Meanwhile, I'd get lengthy email updates about the twins' latest accomplishments, Emma's progress in gymnastics, Ella's reading level, their adorable Halloween costumes. Luke stopped asking to visit Grandma Jean's house. He stopped making art projects for my parents. He stopped talking about the farm that had been promised to him, the one my father had shown him so many times, pointing out where he could have a treehouse where he could ride horses, where he could learn to drive the old tractor when he was bigger. I tried to fill the void. We planned special weekends, invited friends over, created our own traditions. But I could see it in Luke's eyes sometimes, a question he was too young to articulate but old enough to feel. Why wasn't he enough? The first signs of change came in mid-December, just 3 weeks before Christmas. Luke was in bed with a stomach bug, and David was working late on a big project, so I was the one who answered the door when the lawyer arrived. Mr. Harrison was an elderly man with silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He carried a leather briefcase that looked older than both of us combined. "Mrs. Mitchell?" he asked politely. "I'm sorry to disturb you so late, but I have some important documents regarding your son, Luke." My first thought was terror. Had Luke's birth mother changed her mind? Was there some legal issue with the adoption? My hands shook as I led him to the living room. "This is about your father-in-law," he said, which confused me immediately. David's father had been gone for 10 years. "I think there's been a mistake," I began, but Mr. Harrison shook his head. "Your husband's father, Robert Mitchell, was my client for over 30 years. When he passed, he left specific instructions about certain arrangements he had made. There was a condition that these could only be revealed on Luke's 7th birthday, or in the event of specific circumstances. He opened his briefcase and pulled out an envelope, yellowed with age but sealed with red wax. Those circumstances have been met. My heart pounded as I broke the seal. Inside was a letter in spidery handwriting, and attached to it was a copy of a will. As I read, tears began streaming down my face. Grandpa Robert had known. Somehow he had known that Luke would need this. The letter explained everything: how Robert had changed his will shortly before his death, after learning about his son's desire to adopt, how he'd specifically included provisions for any grandchildren who come to David through love rather than blood. How he'd understood, with the wisdom of someone who had lived through his own family divisions, that love and acceptance should be the only measures of family. The will detailed 2 trust funds, one for Luke's education and one that would provide him with the family farm and inheritance that my parents had denied him. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. But more than that, there were dozens of pages documenting Robert's hopes and dreams for his grandson, written as if he'd already met him. "I may never meet you," one passage read, "but I know you will be loved fiercely by my son and his wife. I know you will bring joy to our family in ways that will surprise and challenge us. I know you deserve to have the same opportunities, the same security, the same sense of belonging as any child born into this family. Because love makes us family, not blood." There were even photos, pictures Robert had commissioned before. His death, portraits labeled "My future grandson," with spaces left empty, waiting to be filled with Luke's face when he arrived. Detailed instructions for the lawyer to compile an album for Luke, explaining his grandfather's love and the special place he held in the family legacy. Mr. Harrison watched me read, patient and understanding. Mr. Mitchell was very specific, that Luke should know about this at the right time. "When you called my office last week about updating your will to protect Luke's interests, I knew the time had come." "But I never called your office," I said, confused. Mr. Harrison smiled. "Perhaps I was mistaken. Sometimes the universe has its own timeline." That night, after Mr. Harrison left and David came home to the shocking news, we sat together on the couch, reading and rereading the documents. The trust was substantial, enough to secure Luke's future, to give him every opportunity my parents' prejudice would have denied him. But the true value was in the words, in the assurance that somewhere in heaven there was a grandfather who had fought for Luke before he was even born, who had seen the prejudices that might arise and had worked to counter them with love and foresight. "We need to show him," David said finally. "Not now while he's young, but someday, when he's old enough to understand." I agreed, but as the days passed and Christmas approached, I found myself thinking more and more about timing, about the way my parents had excluded Luke yet again from their holiday plans, about the wall of photos in their hallway, dozens of the twins, but only one of Luke, tucked away in a corner like an afterthought. The final push came on Christmas Eve. My mother called to remind us that dinner would start at 6 and asked if we could come a bit early to help set up, but maybe leave Luke with a sitter until the actual meal. The twins get overwhelmed with too much commotion. Something snapped inside me. "Mom," I said, "Luke is your grandson. He's part of this family. If he's not welcome at Christmas Eve dinner, then neither are David and I." There was a pause. "Now, Sarah, let's not be hasty. Of course Luke can come. I just thought..." "You just thought what? That he'd be content to sit in a corner? That he'd understand being treated as less important than his cousins? At 7 years old?" The hurt in Luke's eyes, the way he'd stopped believing he belonged, my father-in-law's words about love making family. It all coalesced into a decision I should have made months ago. "We'll come to dinner, Mom, and we're bringing something special to share with everyone." Something that might help you remember what family really means." I hung up before she could respond, my hands still shaking with a mixture of anger and determination. David looked at me questioningly. "Get Luke." "Dressed in his best clothes," I said. "We're going to show them all who Luke really is." The next 24 hours were a whirlwind of preparation. I had Mr. Harrison's office expedite copies of the most important documents. I had photos reproduced, the ones of Grandpa Robert, holding a blank frame labeled "My Grandson," the letters expressing his hopes for Luke's future, the revised will pages showing the substantial inheritance. David and I decided to create a presentation, a photo album that told the story of how Luke was loved and valued by someone who never even met him but understood his worth completely. We included our own photos, of the day we first held Luke, of his first Christmas with us, of all the moments of joy and love that had led us to this point. On Christmas morning, Luke was unusually quiet. He'd heard me on the phone with my mother and seemed to sense that something significant was about to happen. As we drove to my parents' house, snowflakes began to fall, coating the familiar streets of our small town in white. "Are you sure about this?" David asked one last time as we pulled into the driveway. I looked back at Luke, who was clutching a small, wrapped present he'd insisted on bringing for the twins. Despite everything, he still wanted to give them something nice. That's who our son was: kind, forgiving, deserving of every bit of love we could surround him with. "I'm sure," I said. It's time they knew the truth. The house was decorated as elaborately as always, with twinkling lights and a 15-foot tree visible through the front windows. Rachel's car was already there, and I could see the twins pressing their noses against the glass, watching for our arrival. My mother opened the door, her smile just slightly too bright, too forced. "Oh, you're here. Come in, come in. It's getting so cold out there." My father emerged from his study, bourbon glass in hand, his face carefully neutral. Rachel hovered. Nearby, Brian standing behind her like a wall of support or defense. I couldn't tell which. "Where should we put our coats?" David asked politely, and my mother directed us to the hall closet like we were first-time visitors to this house instead of people who'd grown up here. The twins ran up to Luke, excited to see their cousin despite the undercurrents of tension. "Luke, we made cookies. Grandma Jean let us decorate them all by ourselves." Luke managed a smile, handing them their present. "I got you something," he said softly. As they tore into the wrapping paper, revealing matching bracelets with tiny charms, a dance shoe for Emma, a book for Ella, I saw my mother watching with a strange expression, almost surprised that Luke would think to bring gifts. "Let's gather in the living room," she suggested. "I'll serve the eggnog, and then we can open presents." We settled in the familiar space, the adults claiming the couches and chairs we'd always preferred, the children sprawling on the carpet, near the tree. I clutched our leather album in my lap, waiting for the right moment. As my mother handed out crystal cups of eggnog, she launched into her usual annual remarks. "It's so wonderful to have everyone together. Family is everything, especially at Christmas." Rachel nodded emphatically. Brian raised his glass in agreement. My father just drank. "Actually," I said, finding my voice stronger than I expected, "I want to talk about family." My mother's smile tightened. Rachel shifted uncomfortably. "Luke has something we want to share with all of you," I continued. "Something we just learned ourselves." I opened the album and moved to sit next to Luke on the floor. David joined us, creating a protective circle around our son. "In this book," I began, my voice starting to crack, "is the story of how someone who never even met you already loved you more than you could imagine." As I turned the pages, showing Grandpa Robert's empty frame with "My Grandson" written beneath, it showing his letters expressing hopes for a grandchild who would come through love, showing the legal documents that proved Luke was not just part of our family, but heir to Robert's wisdom, foresight, and substantial estate. I watched my family's faces change. My mother's forced smile faltered, then crumbled. My father set down his bourbon glass with shaking hands. Rachel's face paled as she began to understand the implications. Your grandfather Robert knew, I explained to Luke, but really to all of them, that sometimes families don't see things clearly. He knew that love is what makes us family, not blood. He made sure you would be taken care of, that you would inherit what was rightfully yours as his grandson. I turned to another page, reading aloud one of Robert's letters. To whoever reads this when the time comes, if any child my son adopts is made to feel lesser, if they are denied their place at the family table, if they are told they don't belong, know that I stand with them. They are Mitchell blood through the heart, and the heart makes a family truer than any birth certificate ever could. Luke was looking at the pictures now, especially one of Grandpa Robert holding the empty frame. He wanted me before I was even here, he whispered, touching the page gently. He did, baby, I replied, my voice thick with emotion. He wanted you so much that he made sure you'd always know you were loved, always know you belonged, no matter what anyone else said. The silence in the room was heavy. Finally, my father cleared his throat. I didn't realize. We lost Bob so suddenly, and then David and I had our falling out. And by the time you all reconnected... This doesn't excuse anything, David said firmly but not unkindly. Luke has been part of this family for 5 years. How we've treated him... I know, my mother interrupted, her voice barely above a whisper. She moved to sit on the floor with us, directly across from Luke. Sweetheart, I'm so sorry. I've been wrong. So wrong. Luke looked at her with those bright green eyes, full of a 7-year-old's confusion and hope. Does this mean I do belong here, Grandma Jean? The question broke something in my mother. She reached across the space between them and pulled Luke into a hug, the first real, unconditional hug she'd given him in months. Yes, she sobbed. Yes, you belong here. You've always belonged here. I'm so sorry I made you feel any different. Rachel was crying now too, moving to join the group on the floor. I'm sorry too, Luke. I should have stood up for you. I should have made the twins understand that you're their cousin, their real cousin. As if on cue, Emma and Ella crawled over, wrapping their small arms around Luke from either side. You're our cousin, Ella said matter-of-factly, as if the adults had been making a fuss over nothing. My father was the last to join the family huddle on the floor, setting aside his decades of emotional reserve to wrap us all in a group hug that seemed to heal years of hurt in one gesture. The rest of that Christmas day was different from any we'd had before. My mother asked Luke to help her set the table, using his hand-drawn place cards. My father showed him Robert's old photographs from the war, pointing out family resemblances. You have his strong chin, he said, which made Luke beam with pride. Rachel and Brian ensured the twins played with Luke as equals, no more taking his toys or excluding him from games. The whole family listened as Luke told jokes, admired his drawings, and genuinely celebrated his presence. But the true magic happened when we were driving home that night, our car quiet except for the soft Christmas music on the radio. Luke was drifting off to sleep when he mumbled, "Mommy?" "Yes, baby?" "Tomorrow at school, when they ask what I got for Christmas, can I tell them I got a whole family?" I reached back to squeeze his hand, my heart so full it might burst. "Yes, sweetheart, you absolutely can." David caught my eye in the rearview mirror, his own eyes glistening. We had always been Luke's family, from the moment they placed him in our arms. But now, finally, beautifully, everyone else saw it too. That night after Luke was asleep, I opened the album one more time. At the very end was a final note from Grandpa Robert, One Mr. Harrison had asked us to save for ourselves. To my son and his wife. If you're reading this, it means my grandson needed a reminder of his worth. Thank you for fighting for him. Thank you for loving him fiercely enough to weather any storm. And thank you for giving me a grandson to love, even though I never got to meet him. In my heart, he was always mine. In your hearts, he was always home. I traced the words with my finger, thinking about how one man's foresight had changed everything. How love, planted like a seed in legal documents and letters, had grown into something powerful enough to transform not just how our family saw Luke, but how they saw themselves. Sometimes it takes an inheritance not of money or land, but of wisdom and unconditional love to show us what we've been missing all along. And sometimes it takes the pure, unfiltered honesty of truth laid bare to crack open hearts that have hardened without realizing it. As I closed the album and turned out the light, I knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter for our family. There would be more healing to do, more bridges to build, more love to give and receive. But for the first time since my sister had her twins, I felt hope, not just for Luke's future, but for all of us. The Christmas tree lights twinkled through our window, casting rainbow shadows on the wall. Somewhere in heaven, I imagined Grandpa Robert smiling, knowing that his love had finally found its way home. And in the morning, when Luke woke up to a house full of light and possibility, he would know, really know, that he belonged. Not because of where he came from, but because of how fiercely he was loved. By a grandfather he never met, and a family who finally opened their eyes to see what had been true all along. Blood may make us relatives, but love makes us family. And our family, bruised but healing, was stronger than ever before. That night, after the Christmas lights dimmed and everyone went home, Mr. Harrison's leather briefcase waited on our kitchen counter. The documents inside weren't just about money or property. They were about a grandfather who'd loved fiercely enough to protect a grandchild he'd never meet. The next morning, my mother called. "I need to see that album again," she said, her voice thick with emotion. When she arrived, she spread the pages across our dining table, tracing each photo of Grandpa Robert with trembling fingers. "He always said family was about choosing to show up," she whispered. I forgot that lesson. The weeks that followed brought small miracles. My parents started picking Luke up for Saturday adventures. They taught him to fish, bake pies, feed the horses. At Easter, when the family gathered again, there was no segregated section for Luke. My mother had even removed the photos from her hallway and replaced them with a single frame, all the grandchildren together, including Luke. In May, Mr. Harrison appeared at my door once more. "There's one more thing Mr. Mitchell wanted Luke to have." He handed me an old watch, Robert's graduation gift from his own father. He wanted this passed to his first grandson, but there's something special about it. On the back was an inscription I'd never seen. "To Robert Mitchell, our chosen. Son, love makes a family. Dad, 1952. My throat tightened as understanding dawned. Grandpa Robert had been adopted too. His inheritance provisions weren't just protective, they were deeply personal. Luke's 8th birthday arrived that summer, and my father stood tall at the family gathering. "I'm changing my will," he announced. "Luke's name will appear first as the oldest grandchild on all documents concerning the family farm." Later, as we cleaned up paper plates and picked up confetti, Luke asked David about the watch. "Grandpa Robert was adopted?" David nodded. "He knew exactly how special you are because he was special too." Luke considered this, then smiled. "So I got his heart and his watch." 1 year after that difficult Christmas, we found ourselves at Grandpa Robert's grave. Luke placed a handmade card beside the headstone. "Thank you for knowing I would need extra love before I even got here." As we walked back to the car, Luke slipped his hand into mine. "You know what? I'm lucky. Some kids only have families that give them life. I have families who gave me life and families who saved it. That evening, my mother hosted a quiet dinner party. Just before dessert, she stood and cleared her throat. Last year, I failed to see what truly matters. I want to tell you all a story about the day Luke officially became ours. She shared memories from the adoption day, things she'd kept hidden, even from me. How she'd cried in the parking lot, overwhelmed with sudden love for a child who wasn't blood. How she'd bought him his first teddy bear that same afternoon but had been too embarrassed to admit it. Fear made me stupid, she concluded. But Luke's grandfather was wise enough to build bridges we might need before we knew we'd need them. That night, David found me standing in our kitchen, reading for the 100th time one of Robert's letters. Thinking about something specific? He says here that real inheritance isn't property. It's the courage to claim your place in the world and help others claim theirs too. You did both, David said simply. Now, when people ask about Luke's distinctive green eyes or his quick smile, I don't say he gets them from his birth family. I say he gets them from his family. Every single person who loves him, fights for him, celebrates him. From Grandpa Robert, who loved without boundaries. From Claire, who made the hardest choice for love. From my parents, who learned to see clearly again. Love doesn't require blood to transform a heart. It only requires truth, courage, and the wisdom of one man who knew that sometimes the greatest gift you can give is proving to a child that they already belong, before anyone else even tries to convince them otherwise. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.